Hi, it's Jen from Shabby Fabrics. Welcome back to Foundation Paper Piecing Series 3 for September. And it's that time of months where we love going to Green Bluff to start picking apples. It's kind of that slide right into, well, autumn. I love autumn. The geese start flying, the temperatures are cooling down, the colors are starting to change. It's special. So we could not resist celebrating that. With the apples, and there's always a barn up at Green Bluff, actually many barns. Some of them even have the quilt block. So this is kind of just a snapshot of what I love about September. Kits are the way to go. If you've been watching the series, or if you're a customer, you're like, yes, kits are the way to go, because you will be getting these exact fabrics, that exact binding. You'll be getting a wonderful backing. It's enough to be hanging for the hanging sleeve on the back if you choose to display that vertically. But just a reminder that with this series, we give you the option. If you want to be having them turned sideways, of course, you'd rotate your apples. Maybe that's a perfect size for an entryway table. So whether you want that displayed vertically or on a table nice and flat, I love that this series gives you the option. And like I said, this is series 3. We started this years ago, reluctantly, and I am so excited to report that many people have been giving us feedback that said, you know what, after watching your videos, I finally gave it a try and I'm absolutely hooked. So if you've been holding out, or you still have a friend, I'm going to say this every time, bring them along, because foundation paper piecing is not intuitive. Many things I can try to figure out on my own. I don't think I ever would have figured this out if someone hadn't showed me. And then once they showed me, I was hooked. Okay, so kits are the way to go. There's something different though about this month that we're going to touch on, and that's this block here. That is a pinwheel unit that you're going to make, and I'm going to take you there, and that'll be really the focus of our tutorial today, is making this portion, and then we'll just do a little bit of a refresher on the process of TSP, trim, sew, press. And if you already know how to do foundation paper piecing, you can skip that portion. So as I said, kits are the way to go. But again, if you've got a stash of fabric you want to use and you just want to pick up the pattern, we love that too. We just want people to create. Inside your pattern, you're going to be getting, of course, the breakdown of what is in your kit, or if you're using your stash from home, maybe you can make a correlation where we use the blue, maybe you want to use another color. Whatever that looks like for you, this pattern is full color throughout, stepped out, and a customer favorite. Two of the things about these patterns that are customer favorites is we include the foundation papers. If you've been foundation paper piecing for any long, and I've got the same books you probably have, there are no papers. We have to go buy that Carol Doak paper. We have to go drive to whoever has a Xerox machine, convince them to let us Xerox the book. I've dealt with those battles before where they're like, are you the copyright owner of this book? I'm like, no. But they've given me permission to copy to make my foundation papers, so you don't have to deal with that. You can stay home and know that you already have your foundations to be able to make the project. And of course, the stickers. We all know that one of the processes that we love about foundation paper piecing is you make a cut, you sticker that fabric. Make a cut, sticker that fabric, and it helps us stay organized. So just like we've been seeing all along in the series, there's different sections that we make individually, and then later we assemble into completed units for the 2 different apple sections and then for the barn. So really kind of a same we've been doing, but a little bit different this month because we've added a little bit of patchwork in there. If you're brand new to foundation paper piecing, what I'm going to be covering today will not be sufficient for you to grab the process of foundation paper piecing. But here's the great news. For series 1, 2, and 3, and the very first of that series, I take that deep dive. It's over an hour long where I'm teaching you how to use the add a quarter ruler. What is this business about foundation paper piecing? Why is this different than traditional patchwork or applique? And it's quite different, but again, Really fun, not intuitive, but easy to learn. So be sure to check that out if you are brand new, and beginners can absolutely be successful on their first go, which I love that too. But let's talk about this particular portion of our, in this case, wall hanging, begins with our pinwheel unit. So we're going to start with a larger section of fabric, trim it down, and it's going to get smaller again. Why we're doing that is, number one, we want to have a larger pinwheel unit because it keeps us safe. Like when the pieces are so small and our fingers are very close to either the rotary cutter or the needle, I get nervous. So we're going to start with a bigger pinwheel unit than we need. We're going to square that up, and then once we start sewing that into this project, you'll see how it'll end up just perfect. And I love the precision of foundation paper piecing. So we start off with our two fabrics that are in our pinwheel unit, and you're going to have 2 squares of the teal and 2 squares of the blue. And in our pattern here, let's just go step you right through our pattern so you can see the process. We don't normally have patchwork inside a foundation paper pattern. So I'm going to assume maybe you are not very experienced in patchwork, or maybe you're a pro, but I'll just assume that way if you are brand new with this, I'll take you through the steps of that and you can be successful. Our first instruction is telling us to draw a line from corner to corner. And I have a temporary marking pen. This is called a friction pen. I use this for most of the things that I mark on where I want the opportunity to perhaps erase that line. With heat, I can do that. But our pattern has us drawing that line, and this is a solid fabric. But if this was a printed fabric, let's say that you're doing your own fabric from home, this would be the printed fabric and this would be the wrong side. We'll be placing the right sides together, and per our pattern, we're going to be sewing 1/4 inch on either side of that. Now, if you are new to quilting and maybe patchwork's not your thing, then I would recommend using something called a seam guide. Tracking 1/4 inch to the left and right of that line might not be something you're comfortable with. I understand that. For that reason, let me show you how to use a tool. I'm going to erase this line. We'll pretend like it was never there. Creative Grid made a tool that's really a seam guide in a way, where we can place this diagonal to diagonal, just like that. And I'm going to draw on either side of that. And when I'm making half square triangles, this is the approach I take. Can I track 1/4 inch away from left and right? Yes. Most of the time I can dial that in, but I know I'm way more accurate sewing on a drawn line. So however you want to get there, whether you're drawing the line diagonally, tracking left or right, sewing 1/4 inch, or you're using this tool, drawing and sewing on the line, however you get there, this is what this will look like when we've just sewn that. Now your next step will be to cut this in half. And by the way, we'll need to repeat this process twice. That's why you have 2 teals and 2 blues. So I wanted to mention that. With any straight edge that you have, a ruler, you can just grab that. We're going to cut corner to corner. Now historically, when I'm making a pinwheel, I generally will press to the darker fabric. In this instance, however, we're going to press open. So let's just do that now and distribute that bulk for both. And again, as we would be repeating that with the second teal and blue combination, you can see how when we do this process, we end up with 2. So when we do the second set, we'll have 2 more for a total of 4. And that takes us really to make a total of 4 half square triangle units. So this is where we are in the pattern. This is us here. And notice the arrows are letting us know we're pressing that seam open. That's what that's trying to tell us to do. Now, here's something that we have noticed. In this instance, and we don't normally do this, we normally just trim off the dog ears right now. But because we want this so square in this, and we want as many guides as we can to really get these completely lined up, and I've got the other two here, we went ahead to help us as just one more lineup guide here. First thing we should do is absolutely lay out our pinwheel. Have I done this wrong? Yes, but let's just lay out our pinwheel first before we get too carried away with sewing things together. Kind of got ahead of myself there just a bit, didn't we? Before we start sewing things together, let's make sure everything is laid out properly. Have I sewn a pinwheel together wrong? Of course I have. I think I've done all of the things. But now that we're sure that's the layout, and again, it's very unusual for us to not trim those feed dogs and have it look just like this, all nice and trimmed up. But this helped us actually as we placed these right side together. It was just one more alignment tool visually to say, okay, this is over this and this is over this, and we pinned and we sewed our 1/4 inch here, and now we press open and then we'll trim. So let's just do that. I thought that was a pretty clever tip. That's not in the pattern. This is just kind of one of those pro tips. That's why you tune in, right? For extra little tips and techniques. And this is one that Tammy mentioned, just that little bit of alignment of not just the edges, but those dog ears stacking on top of each other was just one more alignment aid that really helped her get that fabric exactly where she wanted it. And you can see the sample is absolutely spot on. I'm always amazed actually of the extra things our team comes up with, ideas they have. I was like, I would have never thought of that. This is in that category. I would have not have thought of that. Okay, once we have that, by all means, we can be trimming off these extra dog ears. And I could have even probably trimmed those even before I got to this step, but we're here now. So you can see how that just really, look at those points came together beautifully. I love the precision of that. Okay, before I get too carried away, and once again, same thing, stacking right on top of each other. How I love how these, just those V's line right up. Pin, pin, sew a 1/4 inch, again, pressing open here. So we've done that, kind of done our magic sewing. Let me clean off that. When I was a young self-taught quilter and really didn't have a whole lot of input, right? That was way before social media. You're kind of winging it, you know, you're doing the best you can. There's so many more resources now out there. There's blogs and there's YouTube and so many things. I wish someone had showed me this when I'm about to show you. When I was a new quilter, let me just repress that. I just would stack 2 pieces right side together, pin left to right. No matter what I was doing, it was just right side together, pin left to right. Not realizing that the importance of saying, okay, what are my priorities? What does everyone want in a pinwheel? That right there. That in the middle, everything meets perfectly. Well, if that's what's most important, pin there first. And I didn't know that until someone pointed that out. And then I was like, wow, like, how did I not figure that out on my own? I don't know, but I didn't. But I'm letting you know that what I do in this instance is I look from above. I'm trying to just stack that and see how they make this little hourglass unit here. Once I'm there, I'm pinning. I'll go sew this so I can have a little bit of fun today. I know they've already sewn one, but I want to go ahead and do that. I want to show you what this intentionality can get you by being very specific, pinning here first. Some people, I've even seen this, if it's really an essential place, put just a little bit of dab in there, making sure that it's not anything more than maybe 1/8 of an inch. I've seen people doing this to just lock that in. All right, let's go take this to our machine. Now I've got my seam guide in here. I know, just because I know my machine and I've kind of measured it, I have my diagonal seam tape and my seam guide. This is what helps me not sew on that chunky side, which is my worst habit. Okay, let's see how we did. I'm going to warm up that seam. Let's see how we did. Right on the mark, right? But that's not luck. It's just having a plan, being very precise. If I can open that up there. Remember that little bit of glue? Now it's paying me back. It doesn't want to let go. There we go. Okay, that's why I put just a little bit. I, as a matter of habit, do not use glue in piecing. I don't. I've been seeing some of that. If something is really like it wants to keep moving off, I might. But it is a very rare day that I would use anything like that. It just depends on, again, if something's wanting to slip off of like being aligned, yeah, I'm going to do whatever I need to get that aligned. More pinning, maybe a little dab of glue as needed. So if you have a presser bar or a clapper, this would be a great time to use it. So we have an oversized pinwheel unit. In our instructions here, patchwork unit is oversized for easy handling. For accurate placement of the foundation papers, carefully trim the patchwork unit to 2.5 inches. I love using mission-specific rulers, and we do have a 2.5 inch square. If you're at home, maybe you don't have that, you'll simply measure half of 2.5, of course, is 1.25. So if I had my creative grid tool, I know that's 1.25. I could lay that here, trim here. This is one to definitely use with a spinning mat if you have it. Otherwise, you're going to be turning this all the way around, right? Here, rotate the blocks, 1.25 from the center line, 1.25 from this, 1.25 from that. You get the idea. Again, I love mission-specific rulers. There are many times I want to have 2.5 inch squares, and that's because some patterns are written for mini charms. Mode is kind of one of the few companies that makes mini charms. Well, I don't always have a mini charm when I want one, but I can make one with these rulers. So in this instance, since I do have that, and I'm going to grab a spinning mat. So I don't make any crazy cuts here. Everything is safe. I just have to move things up a bit. I might even move that back toward me. Hopefully you can still see that from the overhead. I have a diagonal line here that I'm going to place, and I have a nice bullseye, right? You can see how that's going right up vertically on the seam as well as horizontally. Now, there's a lot of seams going on the underside, so this has a little bit of a rocking. It wants to not necessarily lie flat because of all these seams. Naturally, any ruler would do that. So sometimes when you have that, it's nice to kind of brace that, kind of with some of my fingers off the ruler itself, just to provide a little bit of stability and something to kind of push against. And sometimes that ruler will move, and I just have to realign that again, because there's kind of a high center with all of those confluence of the seams coming together. And that's fine. But the goal here is to get as precise as a 2.5 as we can get. Okay, so now we have a perfectly trimmed pinwheel unit, and we even have a sticker included in your sticker set that is C1 patchwork, 2.5 by 2.5. That is the first portion of the upper portion of our barn. So let's look at that there, and we'll start going through some of the steps of that starting here, and we have our lower portion. So that's kind of how that works. And the lower portion is actually in 2 separate sections, but the upper portion is all in one. So let's just put that aside for the moment. There's an important note here that this dash line, use the dash line for patchwork placement. Now, we're used to, in foundation paper piecing, having a fabric that is approximately in the right location because most of the fabrics, all of the fabrics actually are oversized and will be trimmed. This one, we need to nail that. We need to really get that in position. And remember that the fabrics are always on the back side of the printed side of the paper. Remember how I said this is not intuitive? That's what I'm talking about. There's letters and numbers here, but the fabric's over there. That's part of the magic of foundation paper piecing. But because we have a pinwheel unit and we don't want that to get cattywampus in there, we want that to stay nice and horizontal, we want to make sure we're well lined up for that. And that's where a light box would be great. If you don't have a light box, that's not a problem, but you're going to want to have something like a sliding glass door that has some light coming in where you can hold that up so that when we get a little bit of glue here, now I'm going to grab this just because I know I'm going to need that aid. I don't have a sliding glass door here to use. I'm going to want to make sure I'm exactly in the boundaries of that. This is that 2.5 that we just trimmed up to. That is, whether you use the 2.5 inch, your own ruler, however you get there, this needs to measure 2.5. If you've been watching our series, you know that the first piece of any part of our foundation paper piecing section, generally we're just putting a dab of glue. We're going to be a little more committed with the glue this time because we want to make sure that all 4 sides of this aren't going anywhere. They're where they need to be and not shifting as we start to add the fabrics on all 4 sides here. So I'm going to flip this over, turn my light on. Oh, thank goodness. Let me turn this down a little bit for you so it's not too bright from above. And I can see that this needs to be right there. And give it a good press. Make sure it is down and not going anywhere. We really need that to be exactly where it should be. I might even add a little bit more glue, kind of right along here too. Just want it to be well positioned. So the rest of the fabrics, of course, have been cut. And we know that when we get ready to work in a section, and in this instance, we know that everything is letter C. Once we have all of our fabrics cut for the entire project and stickered, I've gathered all of the C pieces because I know they're all for my barn. And I have them all in order C2, 3, and all the way down. So our next process will be sewing C2 to the top of our pinwheel unit. And just like we've been doing, we now have to, and I'm going to have to let some of this go now that it's kind of secured everywhere else. That's why we really want to lock this thing down, is it's not shifting on you while you're getting this done. We'll take our add a quarter unit and we're going to fold this back exactly on that line. Boy, it needs to be right on that line. And if it's not, let's just make some tweaks until we really feel like it's right on the line. just a little fussy in this section, but it's worth it. The results are going to be worth it. Let's look at it one more time. Nope, I'm going to fold it back just a touch more. And now we're right on that line, right on that line. The add a quarter ruler we know has two jobs. The first was that edge, kind of a ledge to kind of fold over. Now we turn it around so the lip hooks in right there on that pinwheel unit we worked so hard to make. And yes, we're going to trim it again. You're like, we just worked hard to make that. I know, it's okay. The finished result is going to be worth it. So our next step will be to add our piece C. And remember how we place it where we think it should go. And then we kind of simulate that. I either hold it up or let's again use our light box. If you've got a light box, this is a great reason to use it. So once again, if I hold that here and I flip this over and I take a look, the goal was to do what? Make sure that we've covered C2 all the way around, and we most certainly have done that, right? We're in a great spot to do that. So I'm just going to place that right side together. From this side, I'll put a pin in. And we're going to start sewing. Let's focus on that next. A couple stitches before the letter C, sew directly on that line. Sometimes when we're doing foundation paper piecing, it doesn't need to be so precise, so perfect. It does this time to have a nice square frame around our pinwheel. We're going to sew directly on that. Sew just a stitch or two after and cut your thread. So that is absolutely locked in. So that we're doing the trim, sew, press. We're now in that lane. We're going to keep doing this. So we've already trimmed. Now we're going to sew. I'm going to be using a Microtex size 70 10 needle. That is my go-to needle for foundation paper piecing. So sharp. It pierces this just beautifully because remember later on we are going to remove the paper. And I'm also going to be drawing that stitch length back to a 1.5. Why is that? Again, to perforate the paper, but also to add more strength, more stitches in a given distance. So when I remove the paper, I'm not doing any of that unsewing. No one wants to do that. They only want to sew one time, not rip out stitches as they're removing the paper. So those are some just the things to keep in mind when you're doing foundation paper piecing. All right, double check everything is as you want it, where it should be. And again, we're going to start just before the line and sew directly on the line. So we have our trim, sew, and press. And we all know press is either with the iron or if you're at one of our quilt retreats, which we would love to see you in. And maybe there's a shared resource and you don't want to be getting up or waiting to use the iron. You might opt to use the roll and press, which is just, again, kind of a non-heat way to get that fabric over. If you are in your sewing room, one thing that I wanted to mention is if you have a light colored or any colored ironing board cover, sometimes when you heat up ink or toner, in this case, it might transfer to your ironing board. So you might want to put down a piece of fabric that you don't mind getting a little bit of transfer to in case there was a transfer of any toner to your ironing board. I'd sort of hate to have that happen. All right, so we've trimmed, sewed, and pressed. So let's look at our next spot is over here at C3. Let me move that just for the moment. And now we repeat this process. We again get our add a quarter, and we want to be so intentional about just gently removing, laying the add a quarter next to the paper, folding back, hoping we have it just right. Let's take a look. Maybe just a little bit more. Let's see here. So I'll fold it without that in place. Boy, that's a good spot. I like that spot. And I can see that I'm running parallel with this line. That's a very good sign, right? There's other clues here. This is lining up, because if this was like this, it can't be right. So there's other clues that we can get that we're square. We just want to look at this line, but when you're here and nice and square with here, here, and here, you're in a good spot. Now we'll flip the add a quarter around to get the lip portion, the ledge portion, locking that in, and then we'll trim. And we position our next fabric. By the way, this fabric here is a white with little chicks on it. My brother has Baker's Acres. I'm doing a little commercial I wasn't expecting. They're in Michigan, such an amazing couple. And they have chickens and all the things and the amazing garden. And I just love their chickens running around. And I thought, of course, there's always chickens at a barn. So that's why you're getting that fabric in your kit. I thought it was just really sweet. I'm going to place this right side together. And just like before, and I can see, right, we knew this piece was good and that piece is opposite. There's kind of no way this won't work. But remember, you can always use your light box to confirm, yep, that's an amazing spot. We more than covered our C3. So in this instance, I'm going to put that into position, flip this over, and we're off to S. And once again, we will start slightly before, so exactly on the line, stop right afterward. Trim, sew, and press. Once again. So let's look how we're doing so far. Notice how our lines are running very parallel to this. This is working out very, very well. So we've done C1, C2, C3. Now when you get to C4, because we started sewing a little bit before, you might have to rip the paper just a little bit to be able to make a nice clean fold directly on that line. Don't be afraid to do that. I just pull it back slightly. Remember, the paper is going to be removed anyway. I want to be gentle about it because it's a more delicate spot. But once again, once we are at our spot, I'm laying that at a quarter very deliberately parallel with the line, folding back as best I can over that. For an initial crease, then I'm going to remove the outer quarter so I can get a more succinct fold. And let's look. We want to be right on the line, and we're right on that line again. So we'll flip that over. more of our cute chicks. I'm going to average that because I can see that absolutely is going to work. Very, very obvious that that will work. And once again, slightly before that line, we'll start stitching directly on the line and stop immediately after that line. Okay, we've trim sewed and board pressing. Oh, that's adorable. Look at that. That is so cute. What is it about small and cute that I don't know? It's a thing. It's a thing. And then our last piece of our pinwheel portion is here at C5. So you can see, especially if you're brand new, you can see this is not intuitive. That's why someone needs to show you. But it's a repeatable, you just do the same thing. Where we know, oh, yep, we start a little bit before the line. So that means we might have to just rip our paper just a little bit in order to set our add a quarter right alongside, be able to fold back. I'm going to remove that. Oh, I'm going to fold that over just a little bit more. Let's see how we are. Up a little bit more still. One more time. I want to be right on the mark. Yes, there we go. One more time, nice and flat. Flip it around. Trim. We'll add our fabric. We already know we're going to be right along that, just splitting the difference with the same amount right there with a little bit hanging over of the fabric beneath. Pin from this side. And, of course, a little before on the line and stop shortly afterward. Trim, sew, press. You know what's next. Look how nice and square this is. Like we're really framed this beautifully. And then of course we're moving on to our barn pieces. Notice I couldn't resist, of course, using a fabric that looked like that red wood that barns have. Notice how the grain is all going up and down. I'm going to lay this out. I want you to see the cuts. I think it would look odd if a portion of this was turned sideways. So I want you to just be mindful of these pieces so that they're all kind of tracking this way up and down so that you have this finished presentation. And the same with the lower portion when you're cutting those fabrics. So just something to be thinking of. If you're going to be using your own fabric from home and it's just a red tonal and there's not really a direction to it, that's fine. But sometimes when we're using a directional fabric, we just need to be a little more mindful of how we're doing this. And also how I'm orienting this next piece, because you can see it's a square. So we already did 5. We know that 6 is here. Let me point out what I'm talking about. When I attach this next piece, I could sew it on this way. It would fit. But boy, would that be obvious. So this is when we have to start really paying attention to this portion since there's a directional component. So just like we've been doing, we lay our ruler right along where we want to fold back. I want to fold that ever so perfectly because I want the frame to be the same. We want that to be equidistant. That's why I'm being very careful to be absolutely directly on those lines. And if the add a quarter is kind of there, it's almost kind of blocking my view. I usually just fold over the add a quarter, remove the add a quarter, crease it one more time and go. This is more acute than that. This is more specific because we have something specific in mind. Normally it's not quite this fussy, and that's why this is the focus of this lesson today. Is there are times, and it's worth it, where you're being just a little bit more specific of where something is located. All right, let's trim here. Now what we're going to be doing is I do want to make sure my barn is going this way. So make sure you've got a good handle on that and where north is, right? This is the top of our barn. So we absolutely know our stripes are going to be up and down. All right. Here, I'm simply centering that. I know that when I flip this over, it's absolutely in the right position. I'm going to pin that in place. And you know the drill. Start a little bit before the line, so on the line, stop shortly after the line. And we'll press to the outside. And look at that, starting to happen, right? And of course, over here on this side, we're doing the same thing. Add the quarter, fold over, put your piece, making sure we've got our grain going up and down, 8, 9, and you continue. The most significant part was really like how we make a pinwheel, then squaring it up to the 2.5, making sure it's really sitting beautifully inside that saddle, kind of locking that in. A little bit fussy in this area, but you can see this is just, you know, a barn's cute, but a barn with a quilt block, I mean, there's no comparison, right? So you're going to complete this letter C portion, just like we've been doing with foundation paper piecing. Not nearly as fussy, I would say, in these outer portions, other than making sure your grain is going the correct direction. And then just like I mentioned here on the lower portion, we had section D and E, and isn't that unique that it's joined here on this diagonal? Something else that we've learned kind of as we too have gotten experience with foundation paper piecing is once we join two sections together, we leave these fabrics on, but we remove the paper from the seam because its job is done. And there's no need to leave that bulk in there as we try to join other section, and it's just more to plow through. So for that reason, notice how the paper has been removed from our seams. We've pressed that open, and it's waiting to receive the upper portion here of this unit. I think my favorite part of foundation paper piecing is actually when you get to really square everything up and you get to trim off this excess pieces here. It just looks so precise because it is so precise. And notice how we have these very light lines. That's your trim line. This solid line is representing what the block will be once it's sewn into your quilt, and it is your 1/4 inch guide. So we want to be trimming exactly with a rotary cutter. Don't even think about cutting that with scissors. It's not precise enough. We want this to be absolutely as precise as possible. And obviously we've been cutting these fabrics probably out with a rotary cutter. I don't think I would attempt this project with scissors. But I'm going to use every resource I have at this point to cut this perfectly. Now, sometimes you might be tempted when this portion is done to say, I'm going to start removing the paper. Don't do it. Don't do it. We have put some other very valuable information on here for you. Let's look at what that information is. First off, it says this side joins to the DE unit. Notice how this said this joins to section C. Look at that. That's going to be joining up here, right? This side joins section C. They're letting you know that once these are joined, that this is going to become a unit here. Now, the best part about not trimming this, I'm only going to trim that line. I just see a little bit of excess of right there. I'm just going to retrim that ever so slightly. If you like puzzles, you're going to love this because it fits just like that. We all know what that's like to do a puzzle and you finally find the spot where that puzzle piece has no more resistance. It just slips in. That's what this is like. When you trim your pieces of paper, as I just did so perfectly, there is no other place this could be. As I place this way, and of course we know that this is going to be here, and so like that, notice how everything is just perfect. It's perfect. So I'm going to pin here, right? I always pin the beginning and the end and everything in between. Same down here. It's perfect. But the other reason that I didn't remove the paper isn't just because of the writing on the paper, but because that's my 1/4" seam allowance. Remember how we used the seam guide and we drew on there because we knew we were more accurate sewing on a drawn line? Same story. Now, when I take this to the machine, I don't even need my seam guide. In fact, I'm going to remove it. It is a lovely tool, but I most certainly don't need it because I have my guidance. I'm going to keep the shortened stitch length. And now, let's look. Let's look. How incredible is that, right? That's just awesome. And see how the seam just wants to list there. Let's look at that. Why? Why does it want to go upward? Easy, that right there. Notice there's nothing going on here. So this seams, it goes, please press me upward. Okay, let's do that. And I would press that upward. Now we recommend not removing the paper even yet. You would do your apples, you would even sew your sashing together with the barn in between. We even put our outer border on. There's so many reasons to do that. It keeps everything stable. Once you have that put together, then it's time to start removing this paper. And any little nooks and crannies where I can't get with my fingers and it drives me crazy, I just use the Gypsy Quilter tweezers. These are absolute gold. That's just part of my foundation paper piecing kit, right? I have my add a quarter. I definitely have my size 70 needles. I always have these here. This is just kind of my go-to kit. And just like we recorded in our very first video, once you have your sections together, you have your borders on, we like to put the batting or fusible fleece, which we have here, and the backing. And this is when we actually like to do a lot of kind of top quilting. And that's why we have our thread set. You can see how we stitched on top of our yellow fabric. We stitched on our barn. We were able to really celebrate the green of those awesome Granny Smith apples. So that's what that thread set is about. So I know it's been a longer video than we normally have for foundation paper piecing, but I did not want to assume everybody is, competent or comfortable doing patchwork. So I know it's a little bit of a longer video. Hopefully you see that it is very doable, even for a beginner. Such a repeatable process. So head to the website to pick up this kit, the thread set, maybe Cali Dell, whatever notions you might need, and grab those other kits too. Those are flying off the shelf, and once they sell out, well, I'm back to the drawing board of recoloring those, and it's always nice to get the kits in the original fabric. So again, head to the website to grab your kits, subscribe if you haven't already done so, and I look forward to seeing you next month as we continue our series.